and wanted to know what the medicine was or something in it. And we said that first of all, he made a mistake of getting too involved. To feel like your vehicle was strongly affected by the movie is to get into it too much. And this is the reason we're putting this on tape, is because this is a lesson for all of you. When we're sending you to these movies, they are not to be taken as really viewing passes. They're and even though you can watch them objectively and make little mental notes of whatever observations you see happening in the change of society, or how lessons that you've learned relate to the story and film, but we don't want you getting into it. We don't want you getting intense and getting caught up in the intensity that some of these films try to get you caught up into. You want to stay very separate from it emotionally and look at it just as an interesting observation. Therefore, you're not going to have necessarily a judgment that one film is very good and another one not so good, because the one that was very good was one that you really got caught up into, and one that wasn't too good is you really couldn't get into it. That's not the way you should think about it, because you shouldn't get into either one of them. You're just observing them and being entertained by them, and only relating the things that we mentioned a moment ago. Does that help you?
And in a sense, these movie tasks are mostly just to kind of relax your mind a little bit, because we never feel like there are movies that can give you anything any longer, even television viewing. We feel like it's just something to relax your mind a moment, so that when you get through with that task, you can start back on your segments or whatever it is after relaxing your mind a little. In other words, I found out with myself, and I've heard others say, sometimes you can think about something so much that you get bogged down, and just getting your mind off of it for a short time helps you when you go back to it. And this is the purpose of things. We see nothing that you can learn from a TV show or from a movie.
Right now.
We wish there were, but it isn't like it used to be way back. Now it's you really have grown beyond it. Now it doesn't hurt to some of these private eye type shows to see how security minded they are, and sometimes also to see how unsecurity minded they are. Like I can see times when I'm surprised that they even live through an incident that occurs because of their carelessness. But that isn't teaching you anything, that's just observing.
And there again, you shouldn't get into those episodes, those TV episodes. You shouldn't get into them and get all excited and
have to watch it. Where you can get up and walk off if you want to.
Yes, it shouldn't matter to you whether at any moment you need to go in the other room and do something, whether you miss a little of the story or not.
And you have to do it at commercial time.
Let me turn this off. Well, before I turn this off, we said a few minutes ago that we want everyone in the class to, this is different from what we said earlier, because we said you could write segments if you wanted to, but we want every member of the class to write some segments. And we want every member of the class to really put some effort into putting down thoughts that are significant and that are a part of the thinking we're talking about in these segments, if it should be part of a little newspaper. In other words, the reason is not to have necessarily to have a backlog to draw from should the newspaper materialize, though that may happen too. But the reason is for your sakes. We want you to have thought out clearly the workings of the genes, the importance of it, where your next level mind fits into it, and in making yourself see it in a way that you can present it to human reading forces you to see it from a higher perspective. And therefore we want everyone to have the experience of writing some segments. Now we're going to reduce your TV viewing to a degree so that you'll have viewing maybe a couple or 3 times a week and no more than that in the craft, so that the rest of your evenings or spare time, at least for a while, could go into getting some work done on these segments. We don't want you to think that segments are going to be an endless thing. We want you to work quickly on them. We haven't set any deadline yet, like we did on your books last year, but we do want you to move on it as quickly as you can.
Let me add one more thing. Let's say you write a segment and people read it and they make it fair, which is the lowest grade that you can get on your segment, then you ought to not allow it to discourage you, but try to keep on working until you get a good or excellent on it. And in other words, we want you to not sit down and write from inspiration. You know, humans write from inspiration. They have to be inspired to write something. We don't want you to write from inspiration. We want you to write about something that we hope that you know about. Because goodness knows we've talked to you enough about it, and therefore you ought to know about it, and therefore it is never an inspirational type piece that you write.
We're even hesitant to give you, we said we would give you a list of topics, but we really feel like that you should be able to come up with any number of topics that would follow the guidelines that we have given you. That if you can't come up with those topics, then you're not exerting enough effort to see the value of what you have learned as translated in this approach of explaining genetics and explaining how you can improve yourself in the world, and so that there's reason for improvement. Well, I'm not going to go over those things. We've gone over that enough. But back to what T was saying, don't be discouraged because what this particular group at retreat doesn't know is that because they haven't read what the other group took back. It wasn't on tape about grading systems, but everyone's going to grade each paper. They're either going to grade it fair or good or excellent, and then beside where they're graded, like under the fair column, have voted with good HVV, and say that if he did grade it fair, he'd say not pertinent, or in other words, there's a little room for a word or two of how you in general felt, and it's just a word or two. That means literally 1 or 2 words that would explain why you graded it fair, or good, or excellent. Yes, something that says in a nutshell of why you gave it that grade. Now let's say that you got your paper back, and it was, the majority of it was fair. Okay, it means one of 2 things. You can either forget that and assume that you couldn't develop that topic well enough. Maybe the topic wasn't that good, or maybe you just didn't do a good job of developing the topic. We're not saying you have to take that topic and redo it until it's good or excellent, because maybe the topic wasn't that significant, but you ought to try right again. But what we're going to do is, I don't like this word, require of you, but what we would like for each of you to do is to continue to write segments until the majority of your class has graded at least one and hopefully more of your segments excellent. And this is to remind you that you're not graded on grammar or spelling or punctuation. You can get the person or two that helped you read it at the outset to help you with those little things while you were preparing it. But you're graded on content, clarity, and does it do what we have asked that we would like for it to do? And is it significant? Can it hold your attention? Is it preaching, or is it an invitation type thing? Is it something that stimulates your interest as you read it? So we want every member of the class to try to put some segments out that the majority of your class would find to be excellent. And we feel that all of you are capable of it. So don't any of you listen to any other voices that would say that you aren't capable of it. Okay?
Even if you get to pour on everything, or fair, or if links weren't even considered, in other words, just push through, because I know we've said this before, but when the individuals were writing their movie scripts, they wrote and rewrote many, many times in order to make it where it was acceptable, and each time they came back with something better. So we know you all can do the same thing.
And who knows, the class may grade it fair, and Links might grade it excellent. When Links gets it, you don't even know that. So not only are you being graded, but the class is being graded by how they grade you. So we think this could be fun, and could be really a fun experience for you, and help solidify some things in your head that you need to see more clearly.
Any other questions in regard to this?
Well, I have a question about, I guess the basis of the question is, do all humans follow trends, or do some of them have an option? Like, I mean, let's say, for instance, jogging. If I feel like I need some exercise, and I want to go jogging, would that be automatically following the trend, or is it the way in which I go about doing this that makes it a trend?
Let's say that you're living in a part of the country and you don't have a radio or a TV, and you don't know that jogging is the end rage, and you don't even call it jogging, you just say, I'm going to go run for a while. You wouldn't be falling into the trend. But if you know that jogging is in, and you've gotten yourself some jogging shoes, and even though there may not be many in your community that are jogging, you're still going with a wave. All humans fall into trends, but not all humans fall into all trends. A lot of humans fall into the trends of being untrendy. In other words, they don't want to be seen as a trend, so they fall into another trend of those who don't want to be seen as following into trends. I'm sure that all of you probably went through periods if you didn't like some of the trends that were taking place around you, so you rebelled from them, and you fell with others who didn't like them, and then you had your own trend of ways of looking at things, or ways of doing things. And but they are trends, and they're every human falls into trends that society and the media and news and the school books and everything have brainwashed them to think this is the thing to do. It's just like any of you who were of an age to be married who didn't get married, and were up against the trend of all your relatives saying, when in the world are you going to get married and have children, because that trend was so strong. The extremely active sex life is a very, very strong trend. It used to be, it was related to a relationship or marriage, and now it's just almost more important to have a healthy sex life, whether it has anything to do with a relationship with other individuals or not. It's become that kind of trend. And trends, now that doesn't mean all trends are bad, because some trends wake people up to good action. Like if we could get some trends going for restraint, those would be good trends, great trends. Some of these trends that are anti-violence and anti-nukes and anti-hostility and things, those are good trends. They're very healthy trends. But you can't be anti-violence and go off killing those that represent violence and say, well, I'm only killing them because they represent violence, when you're being just as hostile as they are. You know, this country could actually retreat from all its shores abroad and stay within its confines of the country and spend those multi-billion dollars that they spend out there on all those shores and advance socially, scientifically, medicine, space, at such an accelerated rate that the rest of the world just be left behind. And yet they have to eat up a great large chunk of their budget occupying places all over the globe, so-called under the guise of protecting those segments from negative forces. You see what I'm saying? And that's become an accepted trend. And now there are some who are opposed to it, and so it's helping in that regard, but there's still a real minority that's opposed to it. Just like another good trend was equal rights and things like that. That's trying to help open things up and make humans be more adult and more individually responsible. So not all trends are bad.
In a sense, individuals still have choice of what kind of trend to get into. And your answer was, your question was, what was it?
Whether they would always following the trend whenever they decided to do something, whether they would have to.
There's very little originality, and if that's what you're asking for, humans are into, everything happens to be trend.
It's like the lesson that we had. It's like the lesson that we've had when we're trying to think where, let's say, someone in the class receives something, a pen or a task in the world, and I see it and say, oh, I need one of those too. That would be like a trend. But if I came up with a need on my own, it would be a real.
That would be a trend. It's been influenced by somebody. In other words, if you see somebody with something and you say, oh, I'd like to have that, and go out and get it, that's just being influenced.
Sure. A trend is a type of conduct, an activity that groups are taking, or that is kind of a fad or a phase. But some of those fads or phases become constant for generations and become the accepted norm, so that the children come up in those generations are taught that that's the way it's done, that you don't ever think of not doing it. You see what we're saying? I think you're nitpicking too much with words.
Now that using this as an example about a pen, and then somebody received one and said, oh, I could use that. Remember, the next level wasn't responding this way. In other words, you have the idea of what you need prior to seeing somebody else receive it. In other words, you come up with the idea, but you're not influenced by what somebody else thinks you want. Can you understand that? Can you all understand that? It's remember, like if we if Ted Doe went out and bought a bunch of things to bring back to the craft, and like, let's say, let's use the shoe circumstance, like we got you all a new pair of shoes while you were here the last time, and you went back, and an individual saw your new shoes, and all of a sudden the shoes that they had weren't good enough. So they started making all kinds of questions about their shoes. Their shoes were too tight, or the shoes hurt the feet, and yet we hadn't heard anything about it up until the time that you all got new shoes.
That happens a little bit too.
You see what we're saying? So that it means that they want a new pair of shoes. They're influenced by the fact that you got a new pair of shoes instead of waiting until the time came for them to get a new pair of shoes.
It's almost like, well, if it's the thing that Links is doing, I want to be sure that they know that I need to be put on the list.
Then I mind all of you could use a pair of shoes. There's nothing wrong with it. But you don't want to find fault with what you have because somebody else got something new. In other words, that's a human characteristic. A next level characteristic is that, oh, great, I'm glad that you all got a new pair of shoes, and let it go at that. You see what we're saying? And that way, you don't start looking at your shoes and say, oh, goodness, these hurt my feet. Or they look so bad, I don't know whether they're good enough for this or that. Because, believe it or not, Link watches out for you as carefully as we can. And it's kind of our task. Your task is something else. Your task is to write statements and other things, But in a sense, it's part of our task to make sure that you have the needs that you have to, in order to function in the way that you need to function. And to overstep yourself in a way of letting us know that what you have isn't sufficient, only if it doesn't work entirely. Like, let's use half of these wine openers. It would be wrong of him to try to make his broken wine opener work, because Links didn't know anything about his wine opener being broken. So it's more right for him to write another case if it's broken. And
he has need of it.
Right. It's like his shoes. Somebody's shoes had holes in the bottom. Is it right to keep on wearing the shoes and not letting anyone know about it? No, it isn't. In other words, you write and say, I don't know, I wish I'd like for somebody to examine the shoes to see what they think. And then in return, you all would let us know immediately, because we don't want you wearing shoes with holes in the same way with seat covers or anything else. But what we're trying to do is teach you the procedure on how to handle things in the next level. And you certainly wouldn't, if somebody got something, you wouldn't all of a sudden start examining what you have to see if it was good enough and finding fault with it. That is a human characteristic. Okay? Can you see? It wouldn't be a trend that you would start. By saying, I could sure use that. It would just be really a human characteristic of being influenced by somebody. And, of course, the human vehicle that still exists in you all of wanting something new or wanting something, just wanting something. Because that's a very human characteristic. And I don't mean human, it is human, but I mean it's common. And of which we want you to overcome.
Would be correct that that might be a genetic weakness, like some new shoes,
right.
And then you see somebody else got new shoes, that genetic thing
Sure.
is triggered.
Everything, every bad thing that's about you, even most of the good things about you are genetic things. And what you're doing is learning to see them that way. So that you have control of the ones that like to get out of control, and control the ones that interfere with what you have chosen to do, and to draw upon the ones that can assist you in doing what you've chosen to do. and to squelch the ones that get in your way. But it's just all expressions of programming. There's not a single response that you can have that you couldn't trace to genes. But remembering that doesn't mean that everything is hereditary. It means that what isn't hereditary is what you have been subjected to sufficiently in experience to program your genes the same as they have been programmed through hereditary. You see what we're saying? But and you're always vulnerable to that programming. That's the reason that in an elementary way, some of the children doctors would say those early years are so important with the children when they receive so much of their foundation, and that's because everybody's hammering on them constantly and programming them for certain ways of thinking and conduct, and make such a strong impression on them. It's hard for them to change that programming because it's been such a setting where nobody took anything they said as worth anything. In other words, they looked at the child just as a depository for everything. And what's funny is that they spend all that time depositing the programming on that child that they think will keep it from being like they are. And then once that child gets a little bit further away from that programming, then the genes of what their parentage was begin to blossom, and they say, uh-oh, I've got the same characteristics to fight off that my ancestors did. Now, their ancestors may have kept them very bottled up and are very secret and not let you know what they had to deal with in certain regards. And but usually someone like in their 20s or 30s who had certain characteristics that they didn't see in their background, if they went back and discussed that with their mother or their dad, they would find out exactly where it came from and how it was treated and how it was restrained or what kind of trouble they got into because of it, even though they may have kept it from them. You see what we're saying? But it's all programming. Like we said in the tape the other day, even the potential of those very, very, those genes that are capable of very high programming are there. And that's what you're concentrating on. And you can't have them all expressing themselves at the same time. Some have to be kept very, very well bottled up or under control. There's not I can't think of a good word to explain it, but you've got to get them in a state where they aren't problematic to you, where you can keep them that way. Now, even your genes, even the physical weaknesses that your vehicle has, like nutritional weaknesses, chemical imbalances and things, which are hereditary and in the environment that you were raised in or that your parentage was raised in, even those weaknesses express themselves in mental things like moodiness and severe depression and things. Those are strictly nutritional weaknesses. But they are expressed genetically. Now, once you recognize them objectively as just something that needs some treatment and some attention, then you try to find out what you can do other than program. Programming can keep it under control. In other words, you can exert a lot of energy so that recognizing when that characteristic wants to surface, you're not going to let it do what it wants to do. You can have that kind of control. But until you change the chemistry enough with certain things, will you not have to fight off that thing which is chemically rooted? Sure does cover a lot of ground.
It occurred to me that something like child rearing brings up children might be his segment subject to that. Would that be something that someone who had experience in the world with brings somehow might be better suited to tackle.
Well, you wouldn't write a segment on child rearing, but you could write a segment on a lesson of it, or where it was related to it.
Right. No.
But like in your explanation, let's say at the beginning of a segment you had an explanation of how genes work in the area we just talked about with children and programming and so forth. You don't have to have sired a child in order to know that information. That's perfectly obvious to everyone.
To present it in a way that would be helpful to someone who would be ignorant.
Well, I'd have to know what you're talking about. I'd have to know what kind of topic you're talking about.
See, we're talking about, we want you to write about something that was taught you, and I don't know that we taught you how to raise a child.
No.
In other words, I wouldn't even know what to
No,
write.
you're not writing a segment about raising children. You'd have to, in other words, if you bring that idea in while you're talking about a topic that you have learned in this class, then you could do it. But I'd have to know what topic you're talking about. You see what we're saying?
In other words, we would like for you all to write things that are about things that we had taught you. Not, in other words, how can you upgrade the human kingdom to be more like members of the next level? Not that they will become that, but you will help to rid them of a lot of characteristics that are so unpleasant, like their attitude toward each other, their anger that they display, their attitude, their responses, and
consideration.
Right, all these things that you can write segments on that can help people to live better with each other. The belief that they have to get angry in order to be mentally healthy. It's like it's healthy to blow off steam over the wall. It's healthy to have active sex life. It makes you healthier and makes you live longer and all like that, which isn't so. Now this is what we're asking you to write about, but you have to give them reason to want to change. You can't say because the next level lady come in as soon as we make it worthwhile for them to be able to be here. You can't say that. But you have to give them a reason, like because it will make this place a better place to be in, free of stress, free of anxiety, or free of discord, free of wars even. This is kind of thing we want you to work on, because we don't want you to, even you can write one on how to do a better job at your work. All this sitting around having coffee or at a certain time and feeling that you have to have it. Your attitude towards the ones you work with. The way that we have taught you how to handle it, so that they will know better. They know no better.
Wasn't the segment you wrote on depression?
Mm-hmm.
Well, see, that was a topic, and that was a conduct topic. Well, you're not going to, that's the reason you couldn't write a segment on child rearing. You see what we're talking about? Because we haven't taught you child rearing. We've taught you how to conquer problems, depression in a different way than you would learn out there from but you're writing about conduct topics and ways, habits, things that have caused people to, or things that can cause people to improve. We want you all to try to, we'll come up with these topics if we have to, but we want you all to try to see them. We can't understand why you shouldn't be able to see them.
As each lesson comes your way, it's activating a kind of a gene in you. In other words, it's bringing to the surface something that is in your mind, and you have to take that knowledge and bring it more to the surface through your, let's say, working its way through the surface through your vehicle. And that's only a figure of speech, because it really isn't that difficult to do. It's just a matter of being aware of it and then concentrating on it enough so that you understand what we're talking about when we tell it to you. And therefore, once you understand it, then it has seeped through your vehicle and infiltrated it so that it becomes part of you. Can you understand it? If you take what we say and you don't think about it, you don't put any effort out to remember it or to try to put it into practice, then that gene is kind of dormant. And so this is why we stress, though, that when we give you something, you write it down, study it, make it become a part of you, try to put it into effect in every way that you possibly can. And then it will be an activated gene. Now, at this time, we are trying to see how many of you have activated genes, so to speak. In other words, if you have really, you're proven to the next level that you've done your homework and that you know all the things that we have talked about, and you're going through your mind to recall things that we have mentioned to you. You have, or have talked to you. You have tapes that you can listen to again on lessons. And goodness girls, I think we have plenty of those. And if you want to refresh your memory, then start doing a research in your own mind to refresh your memory. See if your genes aren't more active or are just sitting there dormant, because you want every gene that has been activated in your vehicle to be active, not dormant. In other words, this goes back to the very beginning when we said, you don't ever drop anything. Remember old MacDonald had a farm? We keep all the oink-oinks and the black-blacks and the loo-loos and all that. You don't drop any of them. They're a part of your computer. They're a part of your vehicle. They should be a part of you 100% of the time, and maybe not active, but you should have the ability to recall it.
Right. See, we've taught you, you spend so much effort on learning how not to play tapes. Now we're trying to make you play some tapes.
But the right one.
Yes, some good tapes.
And so we want you to, this is why we're giving you this task, because you research it. Don't just say, well, let's see, I think I'll write about being happy. I think I'll write about sex, overcoming sex. Well, unless you know for sure that what you are writing is what you have been taught, then you may not be writing much of anything that's of interest to the hearer. In other words, what you would want to do is research some of the old tapes that have been
Your programming, if you can remember anything you read, the recall of it proves that you did some programming. Because that's the way that it works.
It's a beautiful instrument, the human vehicle, the way it's designed. But the thing of it is, it has been abused. It hasn't reached its full potential. It's beginning to come into it. In other words, they're beginning to be aware of how the genes are, but they're not sure of, they're not sure, but they're not knowledgeable enough to know the full extent of it. They're going through the hereditary thing now, and but they're not completely sure, I think, that the vehicle can be programmed quite as easily as it can be. In other words, if it has the right programming, the human vehicle can become very much like a member of the next level.
That's right.
But it has to know how to do it. And that's what we want you all to tell them. how to do it.
So you're trying to think in terms of becoming more civilized. This is the way you can talk to humans. Because there's an element of humans out there that realize that the world around them is still very uncivilized and very crude. And there are a lot of people who want to become more civilized, more modern, more 20th century, less primitive, whatever the words are that it would interest me if I thought I was reading something, or it would have interested this vehicle, anything that was more civilized. Always interested the genes in this, so there were genes in there, probably coupled with next level minds, very much in search of betterment and becoming more civil, more controlled, less just acting off the top of the head.
As people come in contact with individuals in the world and they observe somebody acting in a certain way, it can even teach them right, or it can teach them wrong. Let's say you go into a store, you see somebody steal some food and put it in their pocket. If that person who sees somebody steal food, if they're hungry, then they can see that that person got away with stealing food, and he might think, well, I've never thought about that. So I think I'll try it, because here I need something to eat. Now he may go and do it and get caught. And so that's how easily people are influenced. A little kid can see two little boys fighting and how they go about fighting, and then that little individual can observe how they did it and learn from it, but he may not be as good as the other one. He can either choose to fight, or he can choose to back off and say, I don't want to ever get involved in something like that. I don't like my nose to be all bloody or my eye to be all black, and I don't like somebody punching on me. In other words, he can learn either good or bad from that circumstance. And this is what you want to write about, because people are not as aware, aren't as aware as aren't as in other words, they're not aware, I guess is the word, that they can be so gullible. No matter how smart they are still influenced by somebody. Whether it's the president of the company that they work for, or the president of the United States, or anybody. Nobody is in a position where they are not influenced by somebody. But the thing of it is, you want to be careful of what you're influenced by. In other words, if you see a shrewd person able to con anybody, and you think, gee, I'd like to be that way, and you copy those characteristics, then you're not trying to be good. You're trying to see how you can get by in society without getting caught. Now, we watched some tapes about DeLorean yesterday on television that were just released. And in my mind, that man was being duped into that. It's so obvious he was sitting back, and those guys were like, here, eat this candy, I take all this dope, it's millions of dollars. Here's a man sitting here who needs money to make his company survive. And he was, I don't say that... He was a sitting duck. He was a sitting duck. And it's so obvious that he was. And yet, it made everybody, the reporters made people think that he was kind of like the ringleader. And yet the government people were the ones that were pushing it on.
Yes, they set him up.
They just flat set him up. And what, in other words, he was influenced by somebody he didn't know any better not to do something like that.
He was even present in one meeting while the preparations were being set up, and this one man who supposedly was, who was also a government agent, acting as a big mobster in the drug field, said, I'm not interested in this investment unless John here, speaking about DeLorean, unless he's in on it, because it'll give credibility to my effort to make it worth my time. In other words, they were just really trying to con him into it, and then they cut his neck. You know, they slit his throat.
They come and arrest him, and the other guys walk off like, well, I've done my job, you know. And poor DeLorean was sitting there in a daze, like he didn't know what was going on. And
he's running around. He's Bible toting now, and the dumb reporter asked him something this morning. He quoted some scripture: "Know the truth, and the truth will set you free." You know, he's psychologically just in a very beaten down state right now. He just doesn't know what to do.
Developing twitches.
Yeah, he sits there and.
But the thing of it is, if humans could know how strongly they are influenced, no matter, and that dollar, that holy dollar, can influence them more than anything, it would be better to say, I need to go bankrupt, than to do something that someone influences you to do to make it wrong. I mean, to be a wrong action. And these are the things people need to know. And you have 5 minutes right along.
True.